Are you a fan of massive numbers and huge damage? That seems to be the one thing that Barbs can't really get around, even if we do have access to the Barber Heart for Season 1 with our new Malignant Gems here. So what I did was, I've been playing Hammer the Ancients, and I found an absolutely amazing and actually fun to play. I really haven't liked Hammer the Ancients, but this one's pretty fun to play. Build that revolves around just one-shotting everything. And the numbers are insane. They just keep getting higher and higher. The higher content tier you do, you will see why in a second. So there's a lot to talk about. Let's just get right into it. What up, team? It is MurderInc talking about, of course, Barbarian build, Hammer the Ancients, one-shot specialist, and that is exactly what they are. And of course, if you head to the pinned comment section below, I know a lot of people missed this, you will find a build planner for this build. But before you jump straight to that, pause the video for a bit. There are a few things you need to know because the build planner is going to be very specific to the Barber Heart. Now, the Barber Heart's pretty hard to get for a lot of players. Some people don't want to use it, so if you don't want to use it, you cannot use the build that's on the build planner. There's going to be a few tweaks that you need to know about, and it's just going to be better as a whole if you understand how the build works overall. So I have some pretty solid footage and gameplay showing me and Sarat's lair here. I'm running through, I'm critting for up to 32 million damage on just that single Hammer the Ancients hit, which it feels so good. But here's the thing, with the way the Barber works, Hammer the Ancients going to automatically detonate despite how many seconds are on the Barber. And if you're curious about what I'm talking about, let me head straight to it here. If you look at our Barber gem, it says critical strikes and all subsequent damage within 4 seconds is absorbed by your target. The thing is, if you do the entire target's health bar earlier than 4 seconds, it's going to automatically detonate, starting a chain reaction, which is the key here. So in a lot of the runs I do, I see 30 million damage. Sometimes it's even less if the mobs have less health. But once I start getting into those higher tiers, and I wish I had footage of you, I've seen up to 50 million crits. Because again, your damage is kind of, I'm like doing too much damage, but the Barber has its uses, and I'll explain why we use the Barber right now. The main goal of the Barber and why it's so powerful is because we're using the Caged Heart of Tempting Fate. What does this do? You gain 40 to 60% critical strike damage, but your non-crits deal 20 to 15% less damage. So why is that a big deal? It's a big deal because if you don't crit, where you would normally be able to kill off these annoying mobs, you cannot do that without the Barber. The Barber is so strong because you're going to be critting some mobs, no matter what, because crit strike is the most important stat with this new Barber meta. If you know that, good. If you didn't know that, now you do. Critical strike chance is the most valued stat if you're using the Barber because of how well it scales with the Barber. So when using this other Malignant Heart gem here, your non-crit damage can be very painful, especially for Hammer the Ancients, which is why, like I said, if you have the Barber, it's going to absorb the damage, and the ones that crit, it's going to explode upon everyone, which is why you'll see in the runs that I do, where the damage will vary between, I don't know, 8 million and all the way up to 30 million, depending on the content I'm doing, or up to 50 million if I'm doing the high tier content. So this is very important. This is why I think the Barber really rounds out the build properly, but again, it's a hard thing to get. So what can we do if we don't want to use the Barber? So the first thing I want to do is I kind of want to go to this key here of Sarat's Lair 83 here and talk about a few things that you need to understand for this build for it to make sense at all here. So I originally made a Hammer the Ancients guide that I called the Machine Gun Hota. Hammer the Ancients is what Hota is short for, of course, and I really liked that build. This was, of course, before Season 1, because you were just hitting fast over and over again, and you could gamble a lot with the crit rate. Because, like I said, when you don't crit with Hammer the Ancients, you lose a ton of effectiveness on the overall build, and it feels really bad. So I thought to myself, why would I not run as much attack speed as possible and really gamble on those crits when I can just attack fast, do a little bit less damage, but my chance of critting goes up because I'm hitting more times, and it just felt really good. With this, I went the complete opposite way because of the Barber and the other Malignant Hearts that make non-Barber builds very, very strong. So let me show you exactly what I'm talking about here. You might be thinking, so what's the point of doing all of this front-loaded damage? Because you really only have to hit once and you just kill everything. This is going to stay true from stages like this to 88 all the way up to 100. Yes, I'm saying all the way up to 100, you will be one-shotting every single type of mob, regardless of the RNG you currently have here. So I am using Mortal Draw here, and there we go. I almost just lunging strike straight into that explosion, which would have been very, very bad for me for sure here, and the poisons are a doozy for sure. So as we can see, the damage is going to be absolutely nutty. We use one auto here, then we just slam and everything's dead. Everything is dead here. Now the key is you do want a lot of density, so if you're going to be killing inanimate objects like this Silken Spire here, you just want to bring all of the mobs to it. And it looks like everything's just dying. Yeah. So everything is just dying here. It's not that thrilling of gameplay, but I pretty much showed what I want to. Oh, standing in a poison pool. What I wanted to in that first section here. So then we did that, we can talk a little bit about the playstyle, which is very simple. You pop your 3 shouts. You use Steel Grasp to gather up all of the mobs to you. You're going to use Lunging Strike once. Why are we using Lunging Strike once? Because we have an awesome Paragon board, and part of this awesome Paragon board, we are using Mortal Draw, because what did I say before this? Critical Strike is king for every Barber build, and even the non-Barber builds. Critical Strike is, if you've ever played Hammer the Ancients, you know what I'm talking about. You really, really want crit strike chance, because when you don't crit, it feels so bad. You're supposed to be this hard-hitting build, and if you can't get those crits through, what even is the point? So getting that 18% additional chance to critically strike when you're swapping weapons, how do we do that? Of course, you assign the one-handed weapons to Lunging Strike, and of course, by default, the bludgeon weapon is going to be there for Hammer the Ancients. So as far as crit strike goes, I don't have the best crit strike chance, I guess. That's the best way to say it. I'm missing over 2% on the gloves here. I'm missing over 2% on this ring. And this ring is max, so I'm missing 4% here. My crit strike chance is 44, so it could be 48%. And then on top of that, we have the Mortal Draw, so 44 plus 18. And then we get my final crit strike chance, and it is a bit low. I'm going to tell you right now, that is rather low crit strike chance. But since we're using the Barber, we can get away with that, because we know the explosion is going to do huge work with the Barber, and it's going to kill anything we did not crit, because the Barber explosions do splash onto enemies, which can cause some insane damage chain reactions here. So I'm not going to talk too much about the whole concept of using the Barber with this build, because there of course is going to be a very in-depth build planner for this. The only real notable things to know here is that by the time you're watching this, the Hammer the Ancients Ancestral Force is going to get buffed. It's not going to get a huge buff, but the 100% buff is going to go up. I don't recall the exact amount. I think it's going to be 116% total, so we're getting 60% more damage on the Quake, which I'll take it. I might probably play this for a while. I do want to check out Thorns next, but as of right now, it's looking pretty strong. Not only is it looking pretty strong, I'm actually having a ton of fun with this build, which was a shocker to me, because this was really boring and clunky to play prior to Season 1 here. So then we talked about that, let's talk about the non-Barber variant. What are we going to do? So for the non-Barber variant, as we can say, I have everything pulled up here, we're probably going to elect to not take the Cage Heart of Tempting Fate here. I've tried it with and without, and in my personal opinion, while the damage can be significantly higher with your crit rate, it doesn't feel really good when your non-critical strikes can't kill off those pesky mobs that survive because you didn't crit. Usually you can kill any type of enemy even without a crit with a build this powerful. So it's going to be up to the person's preference if they want to take Tempting Fate or not. So if we're taking out the Barber, what are we going to use? We are going to be using Focused Rage. This is going to be difficult to incorporate for a couple of reasons. So after spending 60 to 100 Fury within 2 seconds, your next non-basic skill's critical strike is increased by 22 to 32%. That's a lot of crit strike chance. So how do we make this come to life here? If we can see, the current cost of my Hammer of the Ancients is 64. Why is it 64? Because I purposely do not have Fury cost reduction on my necklace. If I add it to my necklace, it's going to cost closer to 50. And why doesn't 50 work? Because we're not stacking attack speed on this build. So we won't be able to hit 2 times within 2 seconds. We don't have enough attack speed. We're not running accelerating on a two-hander because, like I said, this is a one-shot build. So you want your Hammer of the Ancients to cost over 60 Fury on a minimum. So the next non-basic skill is critical strike chance, which is going to be another Hammer of the Ancients to have the increased crit strike chance, right? That's what we're aiming for here. So you can get away with Fury cost reduction on the boots. You don't need it. I just have these boots from the other builds. Could I take this off? Of course, because if you think about it, you're not going to run into Fury issues if you're one-shotting everything in front of you. You pop your 3 shouts, you use Steel Grasp, you use Lunging Strike, Hammer of the Ancients, everything's dead. Maybe you need a second one, you will have enough Fury for 2 Hammer of the Ancients. You actually have enough for 3 with just your shouts alone, without having to spam lunging strikes outside of proccing Mortal Draw, of course. So you're never going to find yourself rage starved in this build because you're front loading all of the damage to hit as hard as possible with your first Hammer of the Ancients, which is the core of this build. So the more Fury, which is weird to say, but the more Fury your Hammer of the Ancients is going to cost, the easier it's going to be for you to get a solid, focused, raged Cage Heart. Because for me, it costs 64 Fury, so I need a roll that's 64 or less, which, I mean, is hard roll to get for sure here, to increase my skill's critical strike chance. So the higher that Fury is, the more of a range I can get, because as soon as I go over that amount, I have to spend that Fury in 2 skills, and I attack way too slow to get that done. So that is one route you can go for the increased critical strike chance here. The second thing you can do, if you cannot get a Caged Heart of Focused Rage to the specific Fury that you need to, is you can do something that I tried and I actually really enjoyed here. So it's called Caged Heart of Dark Dance. Every 5 seconds while above 60% life, core skills cost life instead of your primary resource, which is going to be Fury. Skills that consume life deal 10 to 20%, and of course it goes even higher, multiplicative damage. So again, if you were using a build that was spamming Hammer of the Ancients, this wouldn't be that good, because it's only once every 5 seconds. But the fact that you're front loading your damage and going for those big one-shot numbers, it's okay if it costs health, because now you have back-to-back free rage Hammer of the Ancients that are going to hit stupid hard. So you can use this and pair it with the Glyph of Focused Rage here. Of course, making sure that your attack speed's high enough. I may be thinking, wait, if it's going to cost health instead of Fury, I would focus Rage help. The reason why it's going to help is the following, because I already know people are going to ask how this is going to make sense. So if the first Hammer of the Ancients is free Fury, this means you're going to generate Fury and proc Limitless Rage very easily. Then you're going to be significantly overcapped on Fury here. You're going to cast the Hammer of the Ancients, and you'll have enough to instantly cast it twice here without having to wait for your shouts to kind of tick up your Fury per second with the aspect you're going to have on your rings, which of course is going to be Echoing Fury. So even though Dark Dance is going to eliminate the fact that you cannot proc the increased crit strike chance, you're still going to get it for that 3rd or 4th Hammer of the Ancients no matter what, if you do get a good roll on this. So those are the first main changes, and this is the first build that I can say can be equally as strong even if you don't have the Barber. And I really do mean that. It can be equally as strong as what you see here in front of you with the Barber, even without it, because like I've kind of already mentioned here, I'm just overkilling these mobs like significantly. Like it's not even close. I do not need anywhere near this amount of damage. I don't have some OP two-handed weapon. I'll show it to you after I kill this pack here. Now that we got these guys dead, let's go and show. My weapon's only 807. There are people with 815s, 820s who have crazy OP weapons. You might be thinking I have that if I'm critting for up to 50 million damage based on the health of the mobs. I don't. Just an 807 pretty good rolls, not going to lie. I would definitely prefer strength over core skill damage, but it is what it is. So those are the only real things you have to focus on when using the Barber or when not using the Barber. Now, if you're going to use the Barber and you really don't like this Vicious Heart here, you don't have to use it. You might be thinking, yes, the critical strike damage is fine, but the only time you really notice a variance when using this build is on bosses. But if you crit, you know you crit because your Barber explosion is out of this world on the bosses. It only takes 1 to 2 Barber explosions in the 80s and 90s I've been doing to kill bosses, which is kind of crazy. And if there are ads, you one-shot the bosses. So that's perfect. The next thing I want to talk about that's important that you may not be able to pick up from the written guide because it's a bit in-depth is going to be your vulnerability uptime. This is very important here. You have exploit. Exploit is not reliable. When I talk about exploit, I'm talking about the glyph here, which I already know is on my final Paragon tree like it is in my most builds because this one's just OP. So when an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. You're not technically dealing damage when you're proccing Barber unless it's not a critical strike, which makes it rather unreliable because your crit's high. So what do we do for vulnerability? I think it's quite obvious that Steel Grasp also makes enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds here, but that may not be enough for long-term fights. What do I mean by long-term fight? Because like I just mentioned before, we're pretty much one-shotting everything. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to replicate this scenario perfectly here, but I'm going to do my best. So we have this pack here. Okay, so as we just saw, the next pack ran to me. So what do I do if the next pack runs to me and I don't have a charge of my Steel Grasp? That's kind of the key point here. So if we saw that the pack that I just completed here, as I'm finishing off these blood blisters, let's get these killed. So I ran in, I gripped the elites to me and I killed them. And then from behind me, I had new additional mobs come to me. Now, if I don't have Steel Grasp up, how am I going to apply vulnerability to them? For either the initial explosion of the Barber to make sure they get one shot, or if it's one of those dungeons where enemies spawn on top of you. You never want to get left in a rough situation where you have no charges of Steel Grasp and you're ready to start pumping damage. So what did I do? I went to the skill tree and I found the most efficient way to always feel good, which is really important for any build I do. I want it to feel good. That's like number 1. Yes, it's fun to one-shot everything, but I want it to feel good. So I took Expose Vulnerability, because every time I cast Steel Grasp, the next Hammer of the Ancients that I cast is going to refresh any vulnerable uptime on the targets and make it 3 seconds. So if I use Steel Grasp, there's about a half-second delay, and then when I cast Hammer of the Ancients, there's less than a half-second delay, so it's about 1 second later that I'm casting my first Hammer of the Ancients after using Steel Grasp, because I Steel Grasp, use Lunging Strike to proc Mortal Draw, and then I use Hammer of the Ancients. So I'm burning just over a full second of vulnerability uptime from Steel Grasp on prepping my first Hammer of the Ancients. Now, like I said, all is well and good if I can just one-shot everything, which you really can, but if a new mob runs in and then you get spawned on by a pack, you may be out of Steel Grasp charges since there is a cooldown, of course, for about 9 seconds. So if you're in that scenario, which you often find yourself in, this is where Exposed Vulnerability comes in here. Now, one thing to note, this does not extend vulnerable on your targets. It doesn't. It simply takes whatever the timer is for vulnerable and makes it 3 again. So like I said, if you're attacking and there's 2 seconds left from Steel Grasp, it's going to instantly make it 3 seconds left as soon as your Hammer of the Ancients lands. I like this a lot. Could you get away with 1 point out and taking 2 seconds? You could. This is enough for at least 1 more Hammer of the Ancient. And what you can do is see how your cooldown rolls are and see how many points you really need into this, because if you could take a point out of anywhere, it would be right here. And if you do decide to take 1 point out of Exposed Vulnerability, you can pump up Defensive Stance for an additional 2% damage reduction. You can put a point to Challenging Shout. This is one thing you're going to notice right away here. I'm not taking any points in Challenging Shout at all. You're going to see in the guide because you can't leave it blank in the guide. And I don't want to misguide people thinking you don't need Challenging Shout. So how am I getting this? It's pretty obvious. I'm getting it from the necklace. So my necklace, and I'm pretty firm on this, where this is required for this build, plus 3 ranks of all defensive skills. You really want this because it saves so much. As strong as Challenging Shout is, we're okay with just 3 points. We don't really need enhanced Challenging Shout because, again, we're just one-shotting everything. And after the patch comes out, that will be live by the time you're watching this, they're going to be nerfing the, not nerfing, but bug fixing the after death effects of things exploding on the ground that just ignores all of your armor, damage reduction, all of that good stuff. So that's your biggest threat, and they're fixing that by the time you watch this. So all things should be good for that. And as far as long-term survivability goes, you're okay with 3 points in the initial Challenging Shout for sure. So the next and final important thing to talk about for this build is, right away you're gonna notice I am not taking Warbinger. And I might be thinking, Murder, you're nuts. You're absolutely nuts. This is the one build where Warbinger makes the most sense. You're right, it does. Why didn't I take it? Because there are so many, and people ask me this all the time, they're like, how are you doing so much damage? Like, just how are you doing insane damage? The vulnerable damage is the big thing. People ask me how I have so much vulnerable damage. As you can see, I'm getting a ton from my Paragon. A ton. A lot of people I see have 632% is a lot of crit damage, but a lot of people I see have very high crit damage, but their vulnerable damage is like 300%, 310, 320, if they are in the end game sense. And like I said, my gear rolls are not very good. I'm missing a significant amount of stats pretty much across the board here. Specifically my rings, I'm pretty sure, are rather terrible. So this is even lower than it can be. But if we think about what you're gaining, let's talk about this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 points. So I get 11 free points on my Paragon by not taking Warbinger, and I'm still, I mean, if you saw any of the runs I've been doing, my Fortify is fine, and I will show you exactly how I do that. And of course, you can take a look at this Paragon trait to see exactly what I took here. Mortal Draw, like I said, we have good sources of armor here. I take things like Brawn here. If you don't think you need the additional physical damage, of course, you can add on up to Slayer here. This is going to be optimal for sure if you're looking for more survivability. And one thing to note, if you do want to go tankier on the HP side, you can take a couple points out of No Mercy, 1 point out of Exposed Vulnerability, and put 3 points into Imposing Presence because it scales incredible with your Paragon board. So any maximum health, or maximum life I should say, that you can find on your Paragon board, you want to take as many of those as possible if you're taking the skill that we just talked about, which is called Imposing Presence. So if I'm not taking Warbinger, I know a lot of people like to think it's called Warbringer, but in game it says Warbinger. Is it a typo? I don't know. The debate will go on until the end of time or until they fix it. So how am I getting fully fortified? Let's talk about that. The main way is Numbing Wrath. I have Numbing Wrath here. Each point of fury generated while at maximum fury grants 25 fortify. On top of that, I have Mighty Warcry. Warcry grants you 15% base life, which is 1194 as fortify. You could take Power Warcry for more damage, which just goes to show you, imagine the fact that I can crit 30 million up to 50 million, and I'm not even getting 10% multiplicative damage on top of that. Just think about that for a second. So the damage in this build is nutty. Now, I don't recommend taking Strategic Rallying Cry. I think Tactical Rallying Cry is way too important here. So if that's the only visible Fortify generation that I'm getting, how am I doing it? This one, it doesn't really count. Each time you take damage, you gain 29 base life as Fortify. This talent needs to be heavily reworked because this is the biggest joke in the game right now. And that's a huge statement coming from a Diablo 4 content creator talking about the game Diablo 4. This is the biggest joke of a skill ever. The fact that this is in 4% and it scales 4, 8, 12 is ridiculous. So like I said, we have Numbing Wrath here. What else are we doing? Something as small as a low roll like Fortify generation here is actually enough to full fortify, which is kind of crazy. And we're about to see that on this next pack that I pull here. We'll see how long it actually takes to fortify. It may not be the best example, mostly because I'm just one-shotting everything, which is kind of like the key for this build, right? So we got all this going on here, and as we can see here, by the time the pack's done, my fortify's full, right? We have 11,000 fortify, and that's only because I took some damage. So 11,569 fortify, don't have Warbinger, just have Numbing Wrath here, and that was just one pack. And it stays on, right? So now moving to the first obelisk here, still have the Fortify. Let's go ahead and use this again. Now I'm completely fortified out. Just one-shot this real quickly. Steel Grasp, Mortal or Lunging Strike. One-shot everything. Like I said, that's kind of the beauty of this build here. So all of this stuff is well and good. So this is going to be the breakdown of the incredible and so much fun one-shot Hammer of the Ancients build. There's a lot of info here, and I know it's weird to have a long video when you have a video planner, but there's just so much nuance to this build. It's really important people understand this, because if you do understand this prior to making this build, you will have zero issues. Zero issues. And why it's so important in season 1 is because once we start figuring things out here, not just, oh, this is the build and it's fun to play, but all of the inner workings of the build, it's going to make it so much easier for you to move on to season 2, to not have to worry about this channel or any build guide channel and say, I remember MurderInc season 1 build for Double Swing, Whirlwind, Hammer of the Ancients, whatever. I remember the strengths, the weaknesses, what made it work, what made it didn't work, and you will be able to build on your own anything you can imagine, which in my opinion is the most fun part of this game here. Still check out the channel though and make sure you're subscribed. Not telling you to go away, I love having you guys here, but the point is, the more knowledge you have, the easier time you're going to have copying any build regardless of who it's by, because you'll have the base knowledge that you need, and you'll get to go through the really fun period of leveling. Yes, I made a leveling guide, but I still enjoyed it, because even while I was leveling, knowing the most optimal way to go through things, I was still changing things around even during season 1. When, like I said, I tested out every iteration. I made 8 or 9 barbarians on the Eternal Realm prior to season 1, figured it all out, but it's still fun to mess around while you're leveling up. Testing out new things, saying, you know what, I'm getting a bit bored of what I'm doing, I want to try this skill instead. And that's actually how the Bloody Maelstrom build kind of came to life. I said I want to use Iron Maelstrom, it's such a cool ability and it starts pumping really well in the mid game, so I just used it from there. So that's going to conclude this video. If you enjoyed this content, smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you all in the next build guide.